Welcome to the Wolf Power Club, the weekly podcast where we discuss energy, industry and politics. I'm your host, Alex. I've sold and bought a few companies and also I've sold billions of litres. Join me on this journey to net zero. Download on Apple Podcasts. Season 1 brought to you by AIM Recruit, the leading recruiters in logistics, transport and energy at www.aimrecruit.com. Welcome to Wolf Power Club podcast, where the greatest energy debates happen and the biggest insights to the industry. Today, I'm very excited because we have a man that I've known for a very, very long time, and you've got South London meets North London in the centre of London. So without any further ado, please can we welcome the founder and managing director of AIM Recruit, Noz, to the channel. And Noz, how's your day been?
Thanks for having me first and foremost, Alex. Fantastic day, the sun's shining, can't complain. Good start to the week.
And although this will come out in the autumn, I can say that's very delayed news. Britain's got its first Olympic champion. So Noz and I, as two sport fans, are very happy about that. So obviously this episode, we're going to go into where the current UK energy driver market is at. But before that, Noz, I would love to know, how did AIM Recruit come about? Because I have a feeling it's not the average story of someone starting a recruitment business.
That's a great first question. So it happened by chance on a random afternoon when I was jobless, looking for work. I went to the job centre, as you do, a couple of times a week, keep an appearance. And it's just over the months, I'd just seen the word HGV plastered everywhere. I knew what it was. Didn't want to be a HGV driver. Wanted to do something, consultative, working with people. And it just, one day, just had an idea. And why not supply HGV drivers? It's such a hard task to actually find them. So as you do, you start doing your research. I didn't have a company name at this point, but I did make my first sales call, which was actually to Rank Hovis. So I called up Rank Hovis, the HR manager. They put me straight through, which doesn't happen so easily. Beginner's luck, I guess. But I spoke to a chap called Peter Barry, who I respect, still in the industry, as a director with the same company. So Peter told me to come in a couple of days later. I didn't expect it. So I had to knock up a presentation on PowerPoint. I didn't have any business cards, company literature. But I did, the following day, set up a company name. And without using the most overused cliche, the rest, as they say, is history. From Hovis, we springboarded onto other food manufacturers and suppliers, which then led us on through referrals to waste and recycling. And then we got a referral to a company called Hoya, which I'm sure you're aware of. So we worked with Hoya for years, and that gave us our foundation within the fuel industry, and hence why I'd like to think we're quite influential within the driver market and logistics market within the fuel industry. And that basically got rubber stamped about 2 years ago when we started our fuel division.
Well, what I love, Noz, is that you've just answered there, say, turn of the millennium, you start up AIM Recruit, and essentially you're sorting out a huge headache for every set of logistics directors out there. And I know I've been on the other side of the table where you've got an MD saying, I want more numbers, I want more sales, but ultimately you can only do it if you've got trucks on the road. Sure. And you need to get drivers in. And you've probably seen it in the fuel market where, say, people aren't picking up the phone in the summer, but come winter, it goes a bit bonkers. Have you got any examples of that where suddenly, come a cold period, suddenly the phone hasn't stopped ringing?
Well, I mean, the example would be every year in fuel. But I think that if I'm going to answer your question, giving you one example, it's post-COVID. So on average, and it sounds great, but the pressure we were under, bearing in mind we supply a number of fuel companies in similar areas, similar jobs. So a lot of companies which normally would have 2 or 3 vacancies would have 30, 40. And like I said, it sounds great in my position, but it's a very, very delicate scenario for those, I would say 3, probably 6 months, whereby, you name the location, there's 3 different fuel companies, and we probably supply all of them, and they all had vacancies. So, yeah, there was no funny scenario. It was a very pressured, delicate situation. But yeah, coming out the other end of it, we still got all of those clients. So
amazing. And just going back a bit into history books, Noz. It sounds great. Clients are happy. They're getting drivers in. I can imagine you put out the noses of a few other recruiters. Anything like that happen to you?
Well, not in the last 10 years. I feel like UK business recruitment market has got a little bit more regulation and credibility. I know there was the old label of being a salesman, which I don't actually see as a bad thing. But I'm talking a couple of decades ago, when we were finding our feet and acquiring contracts. Let's just say the approach wasn't what you'd expect when you've just come out of a business meeting and is celebrating. So to cut to the chase, we used to get some aggressive phone calls from the managing director of another company. And they were always quite established, big companies. So I was very surprised. In fact, let me tell you one, actually. It's crazy. So without obviously saying any names, I once acquired a contract, came back to the office, telling the staff the good news. The phone rang, and I was being threatened with my life. So
no way.
Well, I loved it because I realised I'd arrived. It quite simply, so if you're upsetting people to that extent, of course. But the reason why it's funny is I think he didn't know my surname, and while I was talking to him, he must have seen it. And he said to me, it's not a very common name. He said, "Do you have a brother?" I said, "Yeah, I've got 4 brothers." He goes, "One called Nurul by any chance?" And the next thing you know, by the end of the conversation, he's telling me he has to take me out for dinner. Let's go for dinner because he went to school with my brother. So as death threats go, that was probably the worst one I've seen delivered.
I think that's what we love about you, Noz. Not only do you find it out, but there's a dinner invitation in your out. It's absolutely beautiful. Just moving it on a bit, because there'll be a lot of directors listening to this who, could well be about to, go into an operations role. Obviously, I've had some senior roles myself in the operational area of logistics of energy. Can you describe to us how you create a best working relationship and best working practices to have a growing driver workforce that is satisfied and sort of beating budget targets and working with someone like yourself?
So the answer to that is something which over the years has happened organically, which is, so as a recruitment company, we obviously try to make an impression, and sometimes it takes a year, 18 months before we get a real chance. And I think that's the key, to stay close to your client in a slow, organic approach where the mentality isn't, do you have a vacancy? The mentality is, how's the business going? Where are the problems? So it doesn't always have to be about understanding their requirements. It's about understanding the business. And if you could get the opportunity to demonstrate that, and regardless of what you're supplying, I'd like to think you've got at least 100% more chance to retain that client rather than filling a vacancy and then disappearing into the background because somebody else that's now sitting in that seat has no knowledge of you. If you understand the business, if you make an impact, you become valuable as a partner. And then over the years, regardless of who sits in the seat that's in charge of recruitment, I'd like to think we've got the credibility and the history that it would be passed on, to that person in order to entertain that phone call or go to us when they have a vacancy.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. And just sort of time wise, just to give those HR professionals that are listening, or those managing directors that are listening, or operations directors, say from you guys finding a candidate walking in the depot for assessment, because also I appreciate on the other side of things, you're about to give them keys to something that's probably worth about 200 grand. You've also got obviously the consequences of an energy spill can be massive, and obviously you've got massive liabilities and risk. But from, say, a candidate walking in, whether it's driver assessment or so on, how long do you feel it should take in best practice from a candidate being found to walk in to that driver starting their induction?
Okay, so if I can just tweak your question to not the starting, but to be offered the job, because the starting relies on notice periods, etc. So if a company is managing their own recruitment, then it has to be maximum of 10 working days. Even then, I say maximum. We try to, there is a whole list of due diligence that you need to perform, but that can be done within the first 5 working days, and then after that, it's as quick as you can get that person in. If you're engaging with a recruitment company, then it sounds very, very short period of time, but we've done the due diligence, and we've sent you the CV. You really need a response and book a candidate in within 48 hours. And this isn't something post-Brexit. This isn't something which is new. This is something which, going back to driver morale, motivation, feel-good factor. If you see that somebody wants you and is acting fast, interviewing you, offering you the job, they've pretty much, demonstrated, their keenness towards you. And they've taken away the chance of you going to another interview and being offered another job.
Back to the current driver market. I know certainly on the other side of the table, so, for our listeners that don't know, I've been responsible over the years of having a workforce of several hundred drivers. I've seen some really big major impacts, and I was just wondering if you could go through each of them before you tell us where the current driver market is. So could you tell us the impact of IR35? So what is it for some of our listeners who might not know?
So, in summary, IR35, which I must add was on the cards for many years, it wasn't a surprise, is eventually when they did actually lay it out, I think it was April 2019, if my memory serves me well. Quite simply, it's making clear stipulations which do not allow people to label themselves as self-employed, where when they're working at the same place or delivering to the same places for one company, it's not self-employed. So obviously it impacted everybody who is a labourer or works with their hands, but we were very fortunate to have thousands of skilled jobs filled by European nationals. IR35, quite simply, with the cost of living in the UK, and especially around the M25 area, IR35, dare I say it, took away 20% of their wages and made it untenable, because they can then have a better quality of life if they were to return home. And that's exactly what happened in their droves. But that brings me to the second kind of related scenario that also happened in the same calendar year, which is Brexit. So those skilled EU nationals that didn't leave because of Brexit, they left because of IR35. And we all know the ins and outs of Brexit, and regardless of opinion, what and how it's impacted UK over the last few years. And then we've got the unprecedented scenario of COVID, which quite nicely tied up Brexit and IR35 to rubber stamp the fact that there will be a massive shortage in manual skilled labour.
Yeah, because it's really fascinating, the Brexit debate. I'm never too shy from being political on this podcast, because a lot of people say, "Alex, what's your opinion?" And I think we've seen both things. I think that people said we want Brexit because we feel that employers just make their net wider and wider to bring in cheaper labour to keep wages down. You could kind of argue actually the driver market shows that now driver wages have gone up because there isn't that just cheap source of labour. As a debate, what side of the table on, because obviously all the cost ends up at the end consumer, whichever way you look at it, and it's probably one of the things that has led to inflation, but has also led to higher real-time wages. COVID, I'm really interested to know if you've got any particular stories you can tell, because I remember it was bonkers. At the time, I was leading one of the biggest fuel card companies, and we saw the same customers, literally their volume. So for those people who don't understand, if your volume is quadrupling, it basically means the amount of miles in your truck is quadrupling. Not necessarily your workforce is quadrupling, but it will have a massive increase and people working a lot more hours. I was just wondering if during COVID you had some customers who'd occasionally got the odd driver for you, then suddenly coming for tens of drivers.
I think never before, and I don't think it's ever going to happen again. During COVID, so especially the beginning, the ups and downs. After COVID, which was what you're describing, we had clients that, we wouldn't expect to engage more than once or twice a year. That was suddenly, like you said, 10 different depots, 2 drivers in each depot. And again, it sounds great, but it's a challenge. But yeah, I mean, there was no particular scenario that stands out. It was just that period was full of surprises. I'd have a staff meeting, and by the next morning, I'm having to change the whole meeting again because priorities have changed in the space of 24 hours. And we're quite fortunate in recruitment because most recruitment companies work with contracts where they prioritise and, you plan ahead. You couldn't plan in that period, not during COVID, and for totally different reasons the other way, not after COVID.
So after all those chucks, it leads nicely to where we are today, the current market. I get the impression that there's a bit more calmness and size of employment structure. But could you give our listeners a slight understanding where you think the market is today, how much drivers earn, sort of market rate, and sort of what's the total vacancies you think are missing in the HGV sector?
Sure. So, although, first and foremost, the market has stabilised since COVID, since the aftermath of COVID, I feel like there's probably a little bit of false picture at the moment because the supermarkets or the food distributors, their volumes are low because there's a massive cost of living crisis at the moment. The fuel industry has had massive. Normally it's a peak and a trough, but I think since the Russia-Ukraine war a couple of years ago, March 22, I think it started. Initially, I think everybody panic bought oil and there was a massive peak. But since then, there's been very little activity. Some companies are just keeping their drivers. Some companies are making a few redundancies. But the reason why I say it's almost like a false picture is we're still around 60,000 odd drivers in the UK down of all types, vans, lorries, etc. So the only reason why it's stable is because the current scenario of the country and its economic scenario. But in terms of the current market suits the driver quite simply, or I say driver, but the logistics or transport worker, whoever you are. To give you an example, pre-COVID, we were paying our fuel delivery drivers £16 an hour. All of our drivers, class 1, all of our drivers are now on £22 an hour. Now that equates to a basic wage of around £50,400 a year, and then overtime on top. If you compare that to the £16 figure, my maths isn't that good, but it's probably close to about 30k, or just over 30k. So whereas before the wages would be in line with the client's basic rate that they would pay, now the wages are probably in line with what they would get from the client with wages overtime benefits. So the 50,400 we pay, for instance, is pretty much the same ballpark of somebody on a basic of 40k plus the overtime plus the benefits. So the market is changing. I don't think it's volatile, but I wouldn't describe it as stable at the moment either. It's just a period whereby and we're lucky to have this as well, whereby the industry is, up to numbers and able to do all those things that we can do when we're not selling and we're not delivering.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that great update on the current driver market, Noz. And certainly I think that the driver market, rather than just the trade bodies and drivers talking about it, great, we definitely need like an Instagram Taylor Swift type figure to get people tracking again. But I'd like to go on to, outside of all the very serious things, we know that AIM Recruit have some of the most generous and best hospitality in terms of growing relationships with people. I was just wondering if you've got any funny stories from your time there that are repeatable on a podcast.
That's what I'm trying to think right now. When you say any, I can think of many. It's always good when there's a head honcho or a big boss that's suffers a bit of embarrassment. I remember I can't say his name obviously, but many years ago we had one of my favourite people actually in the industry. He's a cross between Clive Owen and an Essex boy. So he turned up in a very dapper suit, without socks, without tie, and he was refused entry into Ascot, the Queen Anne's enclosure, in front of his staff, in front of my staff, and then he had the task of walking out and going all the way around to the shop and probably paying a Queen's ransom for a pair of socks and a tie. So yeah, that was very funny.
Amazing. Yeah, I think we all know who you are, Steve. Please get in touch, Steve, if you want to be on the podcast. Sockless Wonder, as we like to call him. Right. Now let's go on. We've always got to talk about the future. I mean, we're both young men, you guys are obviously very, very well known for sort of transport, aviation, logistics. What's next?
So transport, aviation, logistics, quite right, and so we started the fuel division as well. However, for the last year or so, we've been working on launching our renewable energy sector, which is going to be in the winter months of this year. So at the moment, we're planning for a December launch, and yeah, I guess you have to watch this space for the rest of it.
That's brilliant. I would say we have a lot of listeners that listen about net zero. The strive to, it's obviously a bit of debate about the definition of that, but certainly I think we can see with the new Prime Minister's announcement, Keir Starmer talking about GB Energy, that goal to basically making Britain an economy based on renewable stuff. I think just like that demand you had for drivers, back 15 years ago and has continued, I see it only going one direction, renewables. Now, finally, Noz, to wrap things up today, because like ever, we've got social stuff to do this afternoon. What is the best way for businesses to do business with AIM Recruit and contact you outside this podcast?
Old-fashioned way, give us a call. Go onto our website. If you haven't got our details, give us a call. Ask for me. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody about transport, anything to do with recruitment, transport. Whether you're a prospective client or just somebody that wants to know more, or somebody who wants to get into the industry, always got time to talk.
Guys, we heard it from Noz today. Where is the current driver market? Well, the reality is you're looking at north of 52k to have a Class 1 driver in there. There's 60,000 vacancies at the moment to do. But in a company like Noz has set up an AIM Recruit, from death threats ending up in dinner to that silver service that hopefully is starting a renewable division. Today on the Wolf Power Club, we've heard about where the driver market is. I think we'll definitely get Noz back on season 2 to see if anything's changed in the driver market. We'd really like to thank him today. And my final thoughts are, get trucking, everyone.